Chapter 2, in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, PL 1975, Chapter 231, adequate notice of this regular meeting of the Board of Adjustment of the Township of Franklin has been provided. Would you call the roll, please?
Anthony Caldwell.
Here.
Laura Grauman. Donald Johnson.
Here.
Bruce McCracken. Alan Rich.
Here.
Robert Shepard. Gary Rosenthal.
Here.
Joel Reese. Cheryl Bagalo.
Here.
Cheryl Bethia.
Here.
Robert Thomas.
Here. Minutes, regular meeting, December 6, 2018. Do we have a motion?
Motion approved.
Second.
Second.
Anthony Caldwell.
Yes.
Donald Johnson.
Yes.
Bruce McCracken.
Yes.
Alan Rich.
Yes.
Gary Rosenthal.
Yes.
And Chairman Thomas.
Yes. Moving down to hearings. First one on the agenda, Reverend Ursula Cargill, ZBA 16-00025, applicant seeking a certification for a pre-existing non-conforming use. This application was withdrawn by the applicant. We're going to change the order to be a little more efficient today. Before I get to that, the final application on the agenda, Adishan Changari Cultural and Spiritual Foundation of USA, ZBA 18-00014, conditional use variance, C variance and site plan, which the applicant is seeking approval to construct a new one-story house of worship with 80 parking spaces at 216 Weston Road, Somerset, Block 512, Lot 12.01 in Zone A, has been carried to March 7th. That's when that'll be heard. If you're here for that, it's not going to be heard tonight.
And was that with notice tonight, so they don't need to renotice?
Actually, it was originally on for January 17th and was carried to tonight, so notice has already been given.
Okay, so the announcement here tonight is that no further notice is necessary by the applicant. We're just announcing it tonight.
Okay, in terms of the order of the agenda, we're going to move down to next to the last one. Will be first, Corporate Community Connection, Rook Cedar Grove Lane second, and Surinder and Rano Singe third. So first, Corporate Community Connection, ZBA 17-0001. In December, the applicant was granted a use variance, preliminary and final site plan to construct a 46,000 square foot mixed-use building. The applicant's returning to the board now to amend that approval for the construction of 8 parking spaces at 610 Franklin Boulevard, Somerset, Block 233, lots 7 to 14 and 29 to 36 in Zone HBD. And is it correct you're actually asking to eliminate some of the variances that we granted in this, basically?
Basically, that's why we're here. We were able to acquire, and Mr. Fordle pointed out in the exhibits, an additional piece of property adjacent to the property that was approved by this board, which was the old annex to the post office. As a result of that, and the original application, we were required a little over 100 and some spaces. We were providing about 60% of those spaces, and there was testimony that since it's mixed use with the shared parking, there was adequate parking. But again, Reverend Soares, to err on the side of caution, had the opportunity to acquire an additional piece of property, so we are now adding that to the site. What I will do, just to refresh the board's recollection, is pass out, or have Mr. Ford pass out, the architectural renderings that we presented at the last building. And for the record, to be clear, the building does not change. The building was approved as a 4-story building with 2 floors of offices and the other 2 floors as apartments. All of that does not change. So there is no change to the building, the shape of the building, the location of the building, or the look of the building. The only thing we will be doing, and again, I will have Mr. Ford sworn in, is adding some parking. And actually, as a result of some staff comments, we were able to pick up some additional parking spaces.
Was this exhibit part of your submission package, or should we mark this separately?
I think we should mark it separately as A1.
A1 with today's date.
Okay, and if we can have Mr. Ford sworn.
Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth? Thank you. Your name and address, please.
Mr. Ford.
Here's the mic.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael Ford, F-O-R-D, Van Cleef Engineering, 32 Brower Lane, Hillsborough, New Jersey, 08844. Here before this board on numerous occasions.
Mr. Ford, you were,
Before you start, let the record show Mr. Shepherd's now arrived, and anything he missed is inconsequential to this application at this point.
okay. Mr. Ford, you were the engineer who testified in the original application under ZBA 170001, is that correct?
Yes,
And this evening, you have a couple of exhibits that you're going to rely on to show the board what is there, what was approved, and what we're doing. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay, and all of those exhibits were part of the submission except for the last exhibit, which was something that we showed the change in the parking. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the first exhibit is the existing conditions plan.
Correct.
Can you just briefly go through what the existing conditions are?
Yes. You can see on the left side of the page is Franklin Boulevard. At the bottom is Martin, and at the top is Lewis. Oh. You can see the existing structure that was raised, but was located at the intersection of Franklin Boulevard and Martin. And then the parking that supported that is essentially the entire impervious coverage. I can go to the board and show you, but that's the existing parking area, which we're going to utilize a majority of that for the new building. And then the subject of this evening's meeting is the addition of one property on Martin that is immediately the residence, the existing residence that's block 233, lots 29 and 30. There's an existing residence on it. That'll now become part of the property.
Okay. And
Project.
now can you go to the next exhibit, which shows the plan that was approved by the board previously, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, which shows the building basically in the location of the old post office annex.
Correct.
And as you indicated, the use of the existing parking lot for the parking for the offices and the residences, correct?
That's correct.
And the access to the subject property would be through both Martin and Lewis Street?
That's correct.
Okay. And then, as a result of the acquisition of that additional lot, can you indicate to the board what we are doing?
We are adding 8 parking spaces, and I'll go to the next exhibit with that.
Right.
You can see, and I can flip back and forth between the two of them. The subtle change is the removal of the dwelling and the conversion of the majority of that property to green space or lawn, and then the 8 parking spaces added along that same access driveway connecting between Martin and Lewis.
So the driveways that were approved by the board previously do not change?
That's correct.
Okay. And the 8 parking spaces will be opposite the handicapped parking spaces and closer to the building, correct?
Correct.
And the area between now the nearest residence, which I guess is to the east, there will be a buffer of landscaping and lawn, correct?
Correct.
Okay. As a result of some staff reports that were generated in conjunction with this application, was there an opportunity, as suggested by the reviewing engineer, to relocate the dumpster?
Yes.
Okay, can you indicate where the dumpster was on the original plan and where it was intended to remain?
Correct. That's up near the driveway connection to Lewis Street, and I'm highlighting it now. It's in a beige color And both the prior approval and the initial submission of this application showed that dumpster in the same location. And that was actually moved as a result of comments that we received at the staff level as part of the original application.
Okay.
And that's where it's at.
Okay, and as a result of the new staff comments, did you find a new location for the dumpster?
Yes. What was suggested is that we relocate the dumpster into this area I'm highlighting now, where there was some green space, and I'll flip to the next exhibit. And you can see we relocated the dumpster from where it was near Lewis to that location as suggested by the staff, and not only located the dumpster closer to the building, further away from the property line, eliminating one of the prior variances, but also availing an opportunity for 3 additional parking spaces along the access driveway from Lewis.
Okay, and this exhibit is a new exhibit that was generated as a result of the staff reports, and I guess we should have that exhibit marked as A2.
A2, yes.
Okay. And so as a result of that requested change, we now are adding 11 parking spaces rather than 8, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the green area between the parking spaces and the residents do not change?
Correct.
And just the dumpster is now moved closer to the building?
That's correct.
Now, there were other staff reports that were generated as a result of this application. Have you had an opportunity to review them?
Yes.
And can we comply with all of the comments in the staff reports?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and the one particular comment I think that was raised by Mr. Healy, so we have it on the record, was a request that we provide fencing along the property line where there are still residences abutting us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did we have a conversation with Reverend Soros, and did he agree, in fact, to put a solid fence along the property line against the residences?
Correct.
Okay. So as a result of this application, we now have reduced the parking deficiency, correct?
Correct.
And we have eliminated the variance concerning the dumpster, correct?
Correct.
With respect to all of the other conditions of the original approval, all of those have not changed, and they all remain in place. Is that
Yes.
correct, Mr. Ford? And for the record, again, we will comply with both the CME report, Mr. Healy's report. The county had a couple minor comments, which we will comply with, and I believe those were the major reports. I don't think there were any other that had any substantive issues. I have no further questions.
Any board questions? More presentation?
No other witnesses, no other questions.
All right, we'll open to the public. Is there anyone who'd like to make a comment or ask a question? Close to the public. Anything else you want to add?
No, Mr. Chairman. I think obviously what we're doing here is improving what was a good plan before, and I would just request the approval.
Okay, any board discussion or motion?
I'll move approval of the application presented.
Second?
I'll second.
Move the board.
Anthony Caldwell,
Yes.
Laura Grauman, Donald Johnson.
Yes.
Bruce McCracken,
Yes.
Alan Rich,
Yes.
Robert Shepherd,
Yes.
Chairman Thomas.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Brook Cedar Grove Lane Properties, ZBA 18-00022. Applicant seeks D1 use variance site plan associated variance approval for construction of 1,070 square feet patio with 40 seats. Applicant requires D1 use variance as outdoor seating was prohibited in the board's original grant of the use variance approval. Variance is also required with respect to parking, front yard setback, and building coverage for the property at 1618 Cedar Grove Lane, Somerset, Block 424.02, Lot 21.01 in the R40 zone.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Peter Lanford appearing on behalf of the applicant, and this was probably the biggest switchover, or the quickest switchover of exhibits. It's not like a rock concert where it takes a long time to set everything up and take one band down and put the next one up. This is another application that has been before this board on prior occasions. The original application was submitted to this board under docket number ZBA 09000004, at which time we received a use variance and site plan approval to construct a hotel and freestanding restaurant at the property at 16 and 18 Cedar Grove Lane. If the board recalls way back when, we really were very certain what we were doing with the hotel, and there were numerous hearings in this matter, and the hotel was constructed pursuant to the approval. And at that time, we were really unsure how the restaurant was going to shake out, whether it was going to be a chain restaurant or not a chain restaurant. So other than having a pad site for a restaurant, we really didn't have a full-blown site plan for the restaurant. We came back in 2017 and submitted an amended application because we wanted to define the restaurant. We made it a little bit taller. We made some aesthetic improvements to it, and the board approved that restaurant. In the original application, there was a condition imposed by the board as a result of the request of one of the neighbors that there be no outside dining. This application tonight is to provide for outside dining. We have met with that neighbor, and they were actually here at the last meeting. We had some discussions with them. They had asked us to put some additional screening up both on our property and their property, which we will go over with Mr. Ardman. But basically, when we indicated where we were going to put the outside dining, how it was going to operate, they had no objection to the outside patio. I don't believe they are here this evening. So with that background, I will call my witnesses. They're not going to take very long, but I think to go through what we did to get to the patio, I think I need to spend a little bit of time. I will start with Mr. Sapphire, who was the architect in the original application.
Could you take the microphone and raise your right hand? You swear that or affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
It is.
Name and address, please.
Joseph Sapphire, Sapphire and Albron Architects, 12 North Main Street, Pennington, New Jersey.
Mr. Sapphire, you were the architect who designed the restaurant and testified on this application in 2017, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and you are going to rely on some of the exhibits that we actually used back in 2017, plus some new exhibits, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and the first exhibit is the interior of the restaurant?
Correct. The first exhibit, the plan is the plan with the proposed additional patio on the rear property. I can point that out. It is in this zone here of the existing restaurant. The front door of the restaurant is down here. That faces the parking lot. This is the proposed patio. The dark area there is a little bit of an anomaly for the video screen. That's actually the area that is proposed to have a covered awning over that section of the dining. But the patio goes from this edge here, from my cursor all the way out to this corner, with a total of 10 tables, 40 seats are proposed in that outdoor dining area.
So it's along the entire back of the, hello?
Yeah,
It's
I'm
along
sorry.
the entire back of the building then?
Not entire, no, about two-thirds.
And it's actually I don't know what you want to call the back or the front, it's along Cedar Grove Lane. Because the entrance to the building is near the entrance to the hotel, which is on the interior of the site. So the patio is along Cedar Grove Lane.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, the patio goes from here, from the entire width of the building. The patio goes from here, it's fairly narrow, right behind that section of the building that juts out slightly. And it goes from there to the corner of the building where there's a gate proposed on a fence line that you'll see more detail about in a moment.
Okay.
But it's about two-thirds of the extent of that facade.
And again, for orientation purposes, the top of the screen is Cedar Grove Lane?
Yes, the top here, that's Cedar Grove Lane. The main entrance drive to the site is off on this side of the building. The parking lot comes up between. where there is a utility parking and staff parking mostly on that side.
Okay, and the neighbor that I referred to in my opening, as we're looking at the property on the screen, is to the left of...
Correct. On the other side of the parking lot that's there, you'll see it in the site plan. The neighbor that had some objection, some discussion was over here.
Okay, now, as a result of the requested change to add the patio, or is there going to be a reduction or diminution of seats within the main dining area?
Yes, slightly. We will have a total of 212 seats within the restaurant itself as a maximum, and that's assuming, every banquette has 6 and every table for 4 is actually 4 and so on. But it's slightly reduced because of this area right here. You'll see that there's a double door now, of course, to provide access out onto the patio. So in there, we had to slide some tables around, and we eliminated at least one in that location.
Okay.
And as I said earlier, the capacity proposed for the patio space is 40. Right now, what we're showing is 10 tables for 4.
Okay, and when we talk about the 212 inside, we're talking about also all of the seats that are at the bar?
Correct. Every patron seat in the space.
Okay. Can you go to the next exhibit?
This is a 3D rendering of the rear of the building. The building, this portion that will in fact face Cedar Grove Lane. The proposal that you saw from the original application was we had standing seam awnings that were sort of shallow, flatter to the building as they wrapped around, and that's all underway at this point. It's all being built exactly like that. The proposal is that we have an awning that reaches out to the edge of that dining space, no further than the edge of that dining space. It is of the same material as the standing seam metal roofs that are the awnings all the way around. So in elevation, which I'll show you in a moment, you almost don't see the difference because you're seeing them flat. So that's why we decided to put a 3D rendering into here so you could see that it's a thin line. It is a permanent awning, and it's not a retractable awning. It will cover, as we said, about 2/3 of the proposed dining area in the patio.
Is it standing seam as well?
Yes, it is. It's the same material that we're doing elsewhere in the building.
Okay.
That patio, be able to enclose it completely?
No, it's open completely. It's only got that section of it has a permanent roof. And then there's portions, as we said earlier in the plan, that are open to the sky. This is the only section that we propose to have the roof, but there'll be no walls.
Okay. And because we are putting a permanent awning, we are required to obtain a variance. You're aware of that?
Yes.
And did you consider having a retractable awning which would not require a variance?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's always an option. However, if we want to be able to mount any low-level lighting so that there's nothing that spills out off the property lines, or if we want to put any heating elements, some radiant heating components, we really can't do that on a retractable. And also the retractable, it just doesn't last very long. It doesn't look very good long-term. It's really given to wear, especially that kind of cantilever off the face of the building. So while we're staying within the architectural character of the building, we feel like the permanent awning is a much better solution.
Okay. Can we move on to the next exhibit?
These are the original elevations that were proposed along with building sections. And as you can see, the areas that have, and it's easier for me just to sort of stand up and point at it, if you don't mind. So this is the extent of that new proposed awning here and here. This is the elevation that faces out towards Cedar Grove, and this is the extension of that new awning that you saw in 3D. It is the same height and type as the other awnings that are all around the proposed building. So in elevation, this is the same beginning height, and it's the same ending height. However, it's a different slope, which is why we put in the rendering, so that you could see that it's a different slope, and it extends out much further than the other proposed awnings do.
And do you have an exhibit to define the outdoor area?
Yes, well, that would be the plan that we had originally. Let me go back to it. Here we go.
Okay.
And that is the extent of the outdoor patio, and then this darker area is the extent of the proposed roof awning.
Okay, and is there going to be any illumination in that outdoor area?
No, not really. This is only basically for circulation. We have bollard lights that are low, that are just basically down to light the floor levels, so that you can walk through the space in the evenings.
So there are no highlights of any kind?
No, no highlights of any kind, and nothing that will project out past the edge of the building edge,
Okay.
pretty much.
And you indicated that there's a possibility that there may be some heating for either the spring or the fall, but that would be radiant heating, is that correct?
That'll be a radiant unit that will be mounted in on the underside of the awning, which is why we felt the permanent awning made more sense.
Thank you, I have no further questions.
Board questions? Bring it on.
Okay, it wasn't on. Okay. I remember from the original application of the hotel, which included the restaurant, because it was one of the first cases I heard on this board. There was also a limit of the time you could have outdoor dining. Go back to that.
No, the original approval had a flat prohibition on outdoor dining. It wasn't a limit on outdoor dining, it was prohibited.
Oh, I thought that there was a curfew.
No, it was not allowed at all.
I'm not so sure this is something that should be on that side of the building. If it was on the other side of the building, I could understand, but towards the road there?
Well, we'll get to how we screen it.
Okay.
Wait, Mr.
I'll
Rich,
wait.
I think we'll explain why we put it there, and
Any other questions?
Is there going to be any type of entertainment on that patio area? Music? Piped-in music?
there may, Mr. Yeager probably is best to address that. He's representative of the management company, so we'll hold that question until he comes up.
Any other? I will open to the public. Anybody have any questions? They will close.
Okay, Mr. Yeager.
Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
I do.
Your name and address, please.
Scott Yeager, 437 Silver Ridge Drive, Copley, Ohio.
Thank you.
Mr. Yeager, what is your relationship to this facility and to both the hotel, the proposed restaurant, and the Imperia?
Our company is Radius Hospitality. We manage the Imperia, the Spring Hill Suites, the restaurant. We also manage the Fairfield Inn and Suites on Davidson. We've been with Rupin since the beginning, since he started building in this area.
And you testified at the previous hearings in this matter, did you not?
I was here in 2009.
Okay. And in 2009, when we appeared before the board, we really didn't have much of an idea of what we were doing with the restaurant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And just to refresh the recollection of the board, in 2009 and even thereafter, did you try to attract a national chain to the property?
We did. We went out and tried to find a brand that would come in as a franchise and or would come in, we'd build the property and they would run it. And I guess they consider this more of a B site versus an A site. They want to be next to a mall or in a high traffic area. And so we tried every option we could and decided the best bet for us was to put the freestanding restaurant and do it ourselves.
Okay. And again, you testified at the last hearing when we amended the site plan to put the height or raise the height of the restaurant. Concerning the restaurant, can you again just briefly go over how the restaurant will operate, what kind of restaurant it is?
Well, the restaurant it's called 2020 Tap House. We have one of them in one of our hotels out in Ohio right now. So this will be our first freestanding restaurant. Our company, we have multiple full-service properties, so food and beverage is my background. We have several of our regional VPs of operations that have all food and beverage background. So this will be we'll probably do 65-70% of our volume will be food. The balance of that will be beverage. We will revolve around, craft beer is the big thing today, American food, appetizers, pastas, salads, etc. So we'll have a full menu.
Okay. In 2007, when we discussed this application and we discussed the restriction on the patio at the request of the neighbor, was a patio even on your radar screen back then?
Back in 2009, I don't think
2009.
Yeah, the patio made a big difference. Today is a different story. Everything that is built out there today, everybody's looking for that outdoor space. It is a differentiator and will make a big difference in our business. People want to be outside when the weather is nice. So, again, back then wasn't a big deal. Today it is.
Now, one of the things that was a concern and a discussion back then was the parking, and we did obtain a parking variance, did we not?
We did.
Okay, and in order to give the board a comfort level as far as the availability of parking spaces on the subject property, did you have the staff at the Spring Hill Suites conduct a parking analysis as to the number of parking spaces that were occupied from October 1st, 2018 to February 16th, 2019?
We did.
Okay. And I'm going to have that board pen. Mr. Yeager, in preparing this exhibit, we start with a base number of 180 total spaces. Those are the total spaces that were allocated as a result of the site plan approval that was granted for this site. Is that correct?
Yes.
And again, to refresh the board's recollection, this site is attached to the Imperia, which is owned by the same owner, and there is a shared parking arrangement with the Imperia. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So there is also, in addition to the 180 available parking spaces on this site, parking spaces at the Imperia that can be used either by the employees and or the customers, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And in your experience managing these facilities, in addition to counting the parking spaces and the occupancy of the parking spaces at the hotel, have you, in the years that you've managed the Imperia facility, ever found that the Imperia was fully parked?
That lot's never been full.
Okay, so there are additional parking spaces, if necessary, on the Imperia lot, even when the Imperia is having a major event?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, the question that was asked by Mr. Johnson about music outside, do you plan on having any live entertainment outside?
No, we do not.
Do you plan on perhaps piping music outside?
Under that canopy, there will probably be some speakers out there, but it'll be low-level background music.
Okay. Can you tell the board your vision for this outside space?
Yeah, I mean, the intent is obviously to have seating out for people to eat. There will be spaces out there to just be able to go out and sit and relax if you're having a drink or what have you. It's a quiet area. There's not live music. It's not intended to have major parties out there, et cetera. This is for coming in, dining, and just enjoying the outside space.
Okay. And based on your observations of the existing parking lot and also the Imperia, picking up an additional 40 seats, and pursuant to the ordinance, that generates an added need of basically, if I can do math correctly, about 17 additional parking spaces. Do you feel that there's adequate parking on that site and the Imperia site to service the restaurant and the additional spaces?
I do. We have found through the information that we gave you that you can see there, it's really no time that parking lot has ever been full.
And basically, I assume the peak days of the restaurant are the Fridays and Saturdays. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that would probably be our busiest times, Friday night, Saturday night.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Can you tell me when these counts were done? Were they done at 6 p.m.? Were they done at 10 p.m.? Were they done at noon?
We have them done by our night auditor, so it is done anywhere between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. So the cars are back, people are back from dinner, they're parked for the night. We get the best accurate count that way.
Yeah, but you don't really get the people that are coming there for dinner. They've already gone home.
There's no dinners there.
At the hotel, there isn't any. If we're talking about Imperia, that's a different story.
But what about this? What about the restaurant?
It's not open.
What they're demonstrating here is the parking demand for the existing hotel. So the last column where they're saying
okay.
remaining
So the
spaces-
restaurant's not even open yet.
It's not open yet.
That's correct.
So the last column, they're
Important
basically
information.
demonstrating these are the spaces remaining for the restaurant when it opens.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions?
Now, the parking lot for the Imperia is a nice large parking lot, but that's a nice hike for people going to the restaurant. You almost need a shuttle bus.
Well, the space back between where the two parking lots connect will be where our employees will be parking. So we'll push that parking back there to free up the space up front.
But yeah, and that actually relates to a question I have, which is, when I drive by there, I do see usually a lot of spaces, but usually the spaces on the hotel site are in the back. And for whatever reason, and you could probably explain much better than I can because I don't know the reason, seems like whenever people go to the hotel, they already park in that front parking lot, which is where the restaurant customers are going to want to park. So from an operational perspective, is there a way to have the hotel customers park in the back and have the front portion available?
Realistically, putting up signs isn't going to do anything. And, it's almost a first come, first serve. Here's the way we look at it. Again, if you look at a Friday and Saturday night that we're busy, most of the people that are staying at the hotel are either going out somewhere, so those parking spaces are going to be freed up. People are going to find a place to park to get in. You're right, that back area is the perfect area for people to come in and just pull in, and it's a short walk right to the front door of the restaurant. Again, looking at the counts, looking at where our people park today, they're going to park the closest they can to that front door. But if it's not available, we've seen them park down further.
And if you can give, just from your perspective, I see a lot of times when the occupancy is 100%, yet the parking is a fraction of what you might expect. Do you know why that is? I'm seeing 100% occupancy in the levels. It's pretty consistent. And so 100%, I'm seeing 71, 73, 69, 73, 68, 65, 77, 72, 68.
It's one of those phenomenons called Uber. It's amazing how many people come in and don't drive into the hotels any longer. Mm-hmm. Or they're picked up by a shuttle and brought in, or they're picked up by someone and stay with us. it's, I can be there in the morning and people come in on these Ubers all day long and they don't have a car. They don't park there.
And then last comment, this is really when the engineer comes up, one of the issues, because of the thing that I've observed, which is, again, most of the people parking in the front, so you're going to have a lot more people parking in the back, probably having to walk up to the restaurant, is perhaps looking at the site plan and adding some more sidewalks, because otherwise you're going to have customers walking in the parking lot. So when the engineer comes up, I'm going to bring that comment up.
Any other questions? Open to the public. No questions, move on.
Mr. Ardman?
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Name and address, please.
First initial F, Mitchell Ardman, A-R-D-M-A-N, engineer with the Reynolds Group, 575 Route 28 in Raritan. And I testified that one time before this board.
A license.
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. And again, just for the record, Mr. Ardman, you've been the engineer of record on this project from day one, is that correct?
That's correct.
And have testified at all of the hearings concerning this project?
Correct.
Okay. Very briefly, and I'm sure the board is generally very familiar with this area, but can you indicate both where the subject property is and also the surrounding land uses?
Certainly, and I think the pointer shows up on the screen on your right, so I'll be pointing to that. So I'm also going to go through the zoning. You'll hear from our planner later in relationship to the zoning questions. But our site located here in the center of the screen that I'm pointing at. The brown you see, I got an older aerial still under construction, but obviously the hotel is complete now. The parking lot's complete. The restaurant in the front is framed coming out of the ground, and they're moving on it pretty well. North is basically up on this plan, Easton Avenue at the top of the screen. The shopping center on Easton Avenue that I'm pointing at here, from the back of our site, the access that was discussed into the Imperia parking lot with the Imperia fronting on Easton Avenue. Directly adjacent to our site is the daycare center. Down from that is the old deli there that's been closed for some time now. Also on Easton Avenue is the Exxon station, and then the pizza place and the Quick Mart that's next to it. The old offices located up from there. Adjoining that are the Madison Suites, which as I'm coming south on Cedar Grove. Next to that is the Presbyterian Church. Then there are single-family residents, and I was counting two, but Mr. Lanford, I think you mentioned that this one may be part of the church.
We were here just recently, and that building is now owned by the church and is going to be used by the church and not as a residence. It was approved by this board.
Very good. And just south from that is just at the edge here, and I have a note, that is the townhouse apartments that this board approved last year, I believe, the 50-unit townhouse project. Across the street is the senior apartments, and then next to our property, I have dashed here in blue, that's single-family residence and two other single-family residents. So the zone lines, which I have shown, the GB zone, up along Easton Avenue, on the far side there is the M2 zone, R20 again on the to the east of the property. So basically, when you are looking at the hotel site and the restaurant site, again in the R40 zone, that's why we're here, and you'll hear about the use variances required. But basically, we have 6 properties that adjoin this site, and just the one I have outlined here is a single-family residence per the zone standards. Again, the other 5 are the daycare, the Madison Suites, the Presbyterian Church, the senior center, and the Imperia, which wraps around the back, and that's part of it. So again, as you're well aware, as this Cedar Grove has developed, few single-family homes left in this area, and even fewer directly adjoining the hotel and restaurant site.
Okay. And Mr. Ortman, you have prepared an exhibit showing the improvements that we are going to make in conjunction with this application.
Correct. That's what we have on the screen now.
Okay. Can you take the board through the proposed improvement?
Certainly. Once again, on the left side, that's Cedar Grove. I'm pointing now to the restaurant and the existing hotel, which is on towards the back of the site. Again, the driveway that connects to the Imperia parking lot here at the east or the rear of the property. We have a blow-up on the lower left side here, which shows the proposed patio, which is in brown on the plan. So the question was asked just for orientation for everybody to remember. You come into the hotel, there's a drop-off area under the canopy at the hotel, and the main entrance for the hotel is on that northerly face of the building. The entrance to the restaurant is on this easterly face of the building that faces the hotel with that parking lot in between the two. And as was noted, the patio area will be facing Cedar Grove. So going down to the below up there, you saw as the architect described that the patio, that'll be for the 40 seats, about 10 tables that are shown to be out there. We feel we've done a well landscaped plan here. I know there are concerns. You're on Cedar Grove. You're going to be about 2.5 to 3 feet below the roadway. If you know that area, it sits down a little bit to the back side. So as the cars go by, they're going to be above it, mostly looking down the road. And we're going to basically screen that whole area. And we've provided a mixture of plantings in the area to do just that. There's shade trees, there's evergreen, a variety of shrubs and plantings, and deciduous trees. So we try to do a good mix. We want this to be an inviting space out there. That's how it's going to be successful, and that's where people are going to want to sit in an area of such. And we think we've landscaped that well. One other thing I'd like to add is just to the bottom of the plan here, that's the neighboring single-family resident. You heard that there have been several discussions with them, and what we agreed were some plantings actually just onto their property, as they had requested, and also at the end of the patio to provide a couple of additional evergreens in that location to screen the end of the patio that faces them.
All right, so to make it clear, we will revise the plan to show some additional evergreens at the end of the patio on our property.
That's correct.
And we've also agreed to put additional plantings on their property as an additional screening.
That's correct.
Okay.
And to give some sense of distances, the restaurant itself right now is 113 feet to the property line. The patio will be 152 feet to the property line. And their house even further for the closest neighboring house there. So we've added distance. And part of the design, coming out basically that back door, it was set purposely to the north to be further away from that closest residence. And, questions that were raised about being on Cedar Grove. So one of the points, and you heard that outdoor seating and patios are a integral part of restaurants at this time. I've worked on a few of them in the past 4 or 5 years, and that's been a focus of really all of them. So we're going to want to make a nice space out there, and people are okay with sitting on what you would call at times a busy road out there, Cedar Grove. We've done the two at the Bridgewater Commons Mall, both the Seasons 52 and the more recent Redstone. And basically, theirs are what you would have thought in the old days was sitting towards the parking lot. But they were well landscaped, fenced in, similar to this. It's not a roadway, but as far as the mall goes, part of it's the ring road, the interior ring road right in front of both of those restaurants. And they've been very successful. As far as seating goes, and I'll get into the numbers, and Mark picked up on it, you might fill up the inside and outside, but just as often on a nice day, people are going to want to sit outside. So those will be full, then the inside will fill up after that. You know, I'm not the operator, but what we've seen on rare occasions, both will be full. More often, it'll just be more outside and give them extra space for people who do want to sit outside. We also worked on next door on the Stage House. As you're aware, they have outside seating in that location, and that's been successful for the restaurant there. And a draw. That is not obviously on a roadway in that location, but it's an integral part of many restaurants that we've worked on.
Mr. Ortman, in addition to the screening that we're putting around the patio, are there any other things that are being put out there to protect the patio?
There'll be a fence in that location for two reasons. For some protection, but also for the access. People can't walk in if they're walking along Cedar Grove. They have to come in the restaurant in the front door. There'll be an emergency out only from that patio area. There's also a guide rail that we put up between the property and Cedar Grove for, you know, any protection in that location.
How high is the fence?
It's a 4-foot high.
And is it what it's made out of?
That's going to be like a tubular steel style. Just, yeah.
Okay, so it's not going to be like board on board, it's going to be something a little bit more light and airy than that.
That will be, yes. But with
Right.
the plantings in between, it should give a nice appeal in that area. As for the parking, and Mark picked up quickly what took me a while to do a little spreadsheet here this afternoon, but at 100% occupancy in the hotel as we go to that, it comes out just about right there, about 71 spaces for the 100. We have 103 as the calculation, but it's actually 100 rooms at this time. So, and that's what we've noted, why that difference is. I also did a calculation on the kind of 2/3 percentile just to see the difference. That shakes out just about the same. You only need about 0.7 to 0.73 spaces per room instead of the 1.1, which is the township code, and the industry standard is typically 0.9 now, so it's even below that.
So how many spaces should you have as opposed to the 180 that you have?
So really, well, let me frame it this way. With the spaces, the really 70 or so needed for the hotel, there are 109 remaining, and you just need 84 required for the restaurant. As far as parking limitations, also, patrons, you can't tell them where to park. Employees, you can, and that's been set that they're going to be required to park at those far spaces where are the empty ones that have been noted by the board and Mr. Healy. So with those provisions, I think it's clear that, you know, there's going to be plenty of parking on this site. Everybody's not going to get a front door spot, but there's going to be enough parking for sure and enough close parking spaces.
Just a couple questions. The hotel has 100 rooms?
Yes.
Yet, I've carried 100. I was informed that a couple were turned to suites, to larger rooms.
Okay. All right, I'll do some quick math because I'll have to figure out, because what you're talking about is the parking demand. But the parking requirement for the ordinance is 1.1 per
Yep.
room.
Correct.
And then there's the number of seats that are going to be in the restaurant. So I'll do that number. But again, the testimony you just gave, just so the board understands, that the requirement is going to be in the neighborhood of 195. Technically, per the ordinance, you have 180. But all your testimony is saying, but the actual parking demand is lower. Right?
That's correct, and you're correct. We had 198, but the technical requirement would be about 195. I think you're right on that, and the demand will be below the 180. We're saying the demand really is in the 160 range once you see what's really happening.
So you have 198 spaces?
That's required. There are 180 built.
Oh, okay, and this is a combined requirement for the hotel and the restaurant?
Right.
Yes. And there's always a synergy. You know that there are people in the restaurant coming over here and they're already parked. So besides the Uber and those things, people are just going to walk over. So we'll have a shared parking built
parking
into the
requirement-
project.
The parking requirement per the ordinance is not 198, it's 194, with that clarification on the number of rooms.
So we're 14 spaces short pursuant to the ordinance. And that doesn't count the available parking spaces on the Imperial lot where we're going to have park our employees.
How many parking spaces are needed for the employees?
When we had our meeting, at the busiest time, we would have 20 employees. They don't necessarily all come in individual cars, but that would be the maximum number of employees at Friday nights, Saturday nights, the busy times.
So that's both the hotel and the restaurant?
That's the restaurant. There's 2 people in the hotel at night. I don't.
I got one more question. Sorry. Okay, so if I'm driving down Cedar Grove Lane, I'm not going to be able to see the outside dining, correct?
No, I'm not saying you're not going to be able to see it. It's going to be, I'm not putting up a 10-foot hedge wall that it's totally screened. You're going to see the awning because that's going to be above any plantings, and you're going to know there's something there, but it's going to be well landscaped. I mean, I don't want to mislead you and say, yeah, you're not going to see anything there. I mean, I don't think we haven't in the past anyway in town just put up solid evergreens, quote, hiding something like this. But it's going to sit down and it's going to be well landscaped, and so it doesn't glare at people coming down the road. And that goes to the lighting also, where it's going to be bollard, low lighting. There's going to be, no light shining out that could be distracting on the roadway.
One last thing, Mr. Ortman, we discussed the parking variance. Are there other variances that are necessitated by this application?
So, so there's the variance of the awning. So that's the setback, the front yard setback. 55 feet is the required in the zone because Cedar Grove is an arterial there. The previous application, it was approved at 41.5 feet. So the part that juts out, as you saw in the architect's drawing, is just the awning. If it was a retractable awning, it doesn't count as building structure, no variance. For the reasons you heard, for permanency, for potentially having some radiant heat under it, for a lot of reasons, it makes sense for it to be a permanent. But again, it's not a solid structure like a building. It is just the awning part, as you saw, it matched well on the rest of the building, and it's just that, is it 30 feet approximately, the width? And so of the whole length of the building, it's only 30 feet.
It's 30 feet from Cedar Grove Lane?
It's just under 28 feet from the right-of-way of Cedar Grove Lane, so another 10 feet to the pavement. So, but the length of it across the building, again, is not the full width of the building. It's just the one section there. So we're basically asking, there we go. We're basically asking a variance for not a full enclosed structure was asked, but for the thin line of the canopy for just 30 feet of the width. So just to put that in context, for the whole width of the building, you can see the relatively small, volume and physical nature of that, which requires the other canopies. There's, I want to point again to the screen, which I point better. The other canopies, which were previously approved, that are just over the windows, you see that other profile. It's a flatter profile, so it doesn't go out that far. That was the prior variance, so it's being kicked up now. So that's the difference, and that's the variance.
And are there any other variances? Mr. Healy, just for the record, noted that we are slightly increasing the impervious coverage from 14.57% to 14.86%.
Building coverage.
I'm sorry.
Building coverage, yeah.
Building coverage.
Yes. And that's again because of the awning.
Okay.
About total lot coverage.
They actually complied. The original approval had an impervious coverage of, I think it was 63.5. and they're at-
63.6 approved, and we're at 63.5.
Say that again?
63.6 approved, and we are now at 63.5.
Okay, your plans say 62.9, but
I'll have to check. I'm reading your notes, so we'll get your notes and mine. But yeah,
Either way, you're under.
we're under the prior approval.
Last question. There were some minor comments in the report, which was issued by the TRC dated January 8th, 2019. We can comply with all of those requested minor changes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And those minor changes do not adversely affect or materially affect what the board is looking at this evening. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any from the board?
Yes, need clarification. On the buffer, you're willing to do the landscaping buffer, protect the patio.
Correct.
What safety barriers are you putting up for those clients, or let's for the restaurant from the road?
There's a guide rail that we're proposing. So we're going to work out with the county, but we show on the plan basically a roadway guide rail to make sure if any errant car.
What's a guide rail?
Guardrail.
Oh, guardrail.
My
Like a metal guardrail.
Yes. Sorry, our liability insurance says we have to say guide rail.
Yeah, but we've ruined it for you now.
and TRC had recommended that be wrapped around to some degree as well, and you just indicated that you'd comply with all the TRC comments.
Yes, no problem with that.
I don't want to be about it. Could that be made to blend in a little bit more with the building and the surroundings, or is it going to be just a standard steel galvanized or whatever it is?
We can work, I have to work with the county at the same time because they have their criteria, but we'd be willing to see if they would take like along the canal where some of them are a little designed a little nicer along there.
Yeah. People bounce off of them once in a while and they don't break. So.
That's correct.
Purpose.
Any
That's
other?
why they're called guide rails. We guide you back into the road.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, two questions. The agreement to provide the plantings at the at the end of the patio and on the neighbor's property, was there any indication of numbers and sizes?
So at the end of the patio, we have one evergreen. We were going to add two more to basically close that out. On the property, there was discussion. I was not exactly in the middle of those, but I mean, to the neighbor's satisfaction.
Mr. Healy, we're not going to show on the plan what we're doing on the neighbor's property because it's not part of the application. But if you want to, as part of the resolution, indicate that we are going to put additional plantings on the neighbor's property to the satisfaction of the neighbor, I think that would probably.
Okay, I'm not sure. So you're proposing it, but it's not part of
It's not on. It's not. We're going to propose it, but it's not on any. It's not on our property. It's on their property. I mean.
Okay, I got it. So you're indicating that on your property at the end of the patio are going to be two more, presumably evergreen trees of 6 feet in height?
Yeah, 5 to 6 feet height, evergreens. Yep.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, the question that I had about the sidewalk. And the question is, so you have, on the site plan now, on the northerly side of the hotel, you have a sidewalk along the entirety of, the edge of the parking lot. On the southerly side, there's a gap, I guess right next to the indoor pool. Presumably, if somebody was to park in the back and was walking to the restaurant, they would then be forced to either walk on the grass or walk in the drive aisle. Is there an opportunity to add a sidewalk there?
Yes.
And connecting to the one obviously in front of the restaurant.
Yes, so there will not be a gap.
And then that might increase the impervious percentage or so.
Yeah, less than a full percent, a few tenths of a percent, yes. But it might put us just over the prior.
Yeah, and I would say if and I know they have a planner here, but I'd definitely say if that increases the impervious above the 63.5 and that triggers a variance, it's certainly a C2 variance because it's addressing pedestrian safety.
Just another quick question. Does this property have a street sidewalk across the frontage?
Yeah. Yes, we put that in. That was a requirement of the original
I
application.
thought so, but I go by there so fast.
Right.
Sometimes. Okay. Wanted to make sure. Any other questions? Open to the public. Are there any questions for this witness? Close. You're finished, right?
I have to call Mr. O'Brien to,
Oh, yes, okay.
Good evening, Counselor. How are you?
Good evening. Could you raise your right hand? You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
I do.
Your name and address, please.
Kevin O'Brien, Madison House, Madison Avenue in Rahway, New Jersey.
Mr. O'Brien, so we can get through this very quickly. Number one, you're familiar with the subject property and the surrounding land uses as testified to by Mr. Ardman.
Yes.
And you are familiar with the zone boundaries as testified to by Mr. Ardman.
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Ardman in his testimony also reviewed what the variances were, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and obviously you are familiar with the subject property and have testified regarding this subject property previously before this board.
Also correct.
Okay, and based on the testimony of Mr. Ardman, Mr. Sapphire, can you just review very quickly what the variances are and render an opinion as to those variances?
Certainly. Well, Mr. Ardman did go through the variances. D1 for the outdoor seating, which was prohibited in the original 2009 approval. The amended site plan is required. Parking variance for 180 stalls where 194 required. Front yard setback to the dining canopy and a building coverage variance are all required here. In terms of, if it pleases the board, you've had testimony on all the particulars, so I think I'll just go right to the proofs and try to wrap this up for everybody. In terms of the use variance being that this use was prohibited by that original application and resolution, so therefore we need a use variance in order to have this at this site. A use variance, as you know, has to meet the positive criteria. Positive criteria are rooted in the municipal land use law, and several of the purposes of the land use law at 40:55D-2 are supported in this application. First one is item A, to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of all lands in this state in a manner which will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. Item C, provide adequate light, air, and open space. Item G, provide sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of commercial uses. And I, to promote a desirable visual environment. I believe that this application is consistent with those passages by constructing an outdoor seating area in an approved restaurant in a commercial area with hotels, a large church, banquet center, and residences in this general area. The general welfare is advanced by providing outdoor seating for hotel guests, visitors, and residents. Open space is provided with the nature of the outdoor seating. A desirable visual environment is provided with the extensive landscaping that is being provided, and outdoor seating has become, as you've heard, an expected amenity at restaurants these days. Over the last 10 years, they have certainly taken off in popularity. In the 4 towns where I serve as their planner, I've drafted outdoor seating ordinances in all those towns over the last 12, 13 years now. As a use variance, we have to meet the negative criteria. So the first part of that is that we can reconcile the application with the intent and purpose of the master plan. This application does advance the purposes of the master plan by several of the goals that are listed, including encourage commercial and industrial development in areas with access to major regional highways, such as I-287, and in established areas. Also encourage new construction and renovation in developed areas. And then last, provide adequate community services and facilities to serve the needs of current and future township residents. This application supports those goals by providing an outdoor seating area at an existing restaurant close to the area road network in a commercial area that has a large number of overnight guests, visitors, and residents. Second, for the negative criteria, we've got to show that the proposed use has no negative impact upon the neighborhood and surrounding properties. You've seen the extensive landscaping that has been provided by Mr. Ardman, both on the patio, at the southern end of the property, as well as discussing additional landscaping on the neighbor's property to the south. This will severely limit any noise that is generated, and actually in a straight line from the patio to the nearest residence, that noise would have to travel through the restaurant itself in order to get there. So I believe that that is adequate for this use, and therefore I don't see any negative impacts. The bulk variances, I believe, can be granted. First, they're subsumed under the D1 use variance, but specifically I believe that they can be granted by an argument that the benefits outweigh the detriments. The parking variance in particular, adequate parking is on this site, as you've seen from the studies. Guests don't always have their own cars. This property shares the parking lot with the hotel, which shares a parking lot with the Imperia, so there's certainly plenty of parking, as you've heard. The front yard setback, I believe that can be mitigated through the extensive landscaping that is being proposed. It will be visible, as Mr. Ardman testified to, but not an awful lot. And if everybody travels as fast as the chairman through this street, it may not be visible at all. As for building coverage, the 15.57 to 15.86 is just de minimis. So I believe the bulk variances can be granted under the flexible C2 standard, and I would conclude my testimony by saying that I believe this application can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantial impairment of the zone plan and the zoning ordinance. And I welcome any questions.
Any questions? Okay. We'll open to the public for anyone who wants to say anything, state an opinion.
Mr. Chairman, as you know from being on the planning board, the one thing that this township has been asking for years and years and years is exactly what the applicant is building here, a new restaurant, another real restaurant. We're also lucky that the developer, Mr. Patel, is everything that he's done in the township has been of the highest quality. You could see from the rates that he has there, and at the other hotel and at the Imperia, which is fine, he only does top-notch development. In addition, the one issue that was with the outdoor dining was because the adjacent property owner was very concerned about the outdoor dining. The reason this matter was postponed to this evening was because he took the time directly after the meeting to spend probably over an hour with the applicant to come to an agreement as to how any issues would be taken care of. And I think you can see by turning around and noticing that those people that were here and were adamant against it, sorry about that, I had to turn around, are not here. Because once again, the applicant, Mr. Patel, took the opportunity to satisfy that and to actually do more than was required, because he expects his developments to be of the utmost quality, and as you can see from everything that he's done, that's been the case. So I urge the board to approve this application this evening.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll close. Anything you need to add? Seem to have the township working for you tonight here.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as you know, being a resident of Cedar Grove Lane and being very involved in this project from the beginning, I think we delivered what we told you we would deliver with respect to the hotel. And as you see the restaurant being constructed, we're delivering what we told you we were going to deliver as far as the restaurant. I think the outdoor space is another amenity, which I think is a benefit, and I would hope that the board would grant the variance to allow the outdoor seating. And I thank you for your time and consideration.
All right, just be tough with the county. I think it's a nice project, but I want to see a interstate highway guardrail out in front of the facility that's being built as nice as this has been. And there's no guardrail there now. Has been a car go through the front of the property in 40-some years. Any other questions, comments, or resolution?
Yeah, just one quick question. Mr. Yeager, what's the name of this restaurant again? And there's one currently.
We have one in a hotel in Canton, Ohio. It was the first one that we did. Does very well there. This will be the first freestanding, but it's the perfect fit for that site and for the hotels in the area around us.
Just out of curiosity, I went online to take a look at the website, and I didn't see a menu on the website. What kind of food?
So again, it's going to be a wide variety. It's I guess you'd call it a gastropub, but it is appetizers, pizzas, sandwiches, pastas, entrees. It'll be a full menu. During the week, the area is full of corporate guests that really have nowhere to go, and they all drive away. We take people outside this area all the time from our hotels. So this will be the perfect opportunity to be able to capture them. So during the week, it'll be very much corporate, and on the weekend, we're hoping that we're going to get the
Casual.
residents, that casual, and we have a tremendous amount of weddings that stay with us, obviously with the Imperia, and even with the Fairfield, we do an awful lot of wedding rooms there. So I think the market will benefit from it, and again, it's a well-rounded facility and menu, and so I think we'll be able to attract people.
Now, how about breakfast?
I will not be doing breakfast there at this point. We're planning on doing a brunch type menu on Sundays, but the hotels all around there, all like the Spring Hill Suites, breakfast is included. Same with Fairfield, so it would be redundant for us to do that.
Okay, again,
My
any
pleasure.
discussion or motion?
I'll make a motion, unless there's discussion. I move that we grant Rook Cedar Grove Lane Properties the D1 variance and all the bulk variances. They need to construct a patio on their premises. There will be no outside live entertainment, and the property owner will work with the resident that was discussed tonight to create a landscaping plan that will be to the satisfaction of the neighbor, and they will work with the county to build a guardrail on Cedar Grove Lane that is more rustic than the typical guardrail seen on highways and other locations.
I'd like to add also that they'll build a sidewalk in accordance with the discussion with Mr. Healy. that if it turns out that it increases coverage and creates another variance, that will be approved by this application.
Okay, that should cover.
Accepted, I accept that amendment.
Second,
I'll second it.
discussion, poll the board.
Anthony Caldwell,
Yes.
Laura Grauman, Donald Johnson,
Yes.
Bruce McCracken,
Yes.
Alan Rich,
Yes.
Robert Shepherd,
Yes.
Chairman Thomas.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Surinder and Rano Senj, ZBA 17-00020, hardship variance in which the applicant seeking a variance due to his going 1,070 square feet over previously approved impervious coverage, 3 Buell Street, Somerset, Block 83, Lot 1.04, in the R20 zone.
That is also my application. Can we take 2 minutes before we start that application so I can take a break?
We'll have a 2-minute recess.
Thank you.
You ready?
I don't know. Mr. Chairman, this is another application this is actually a continuation, and we were before this board on January 18th of 2018. To refresh the board's recollection, Mr. Singh, who is the applicant, is the owner of the property on Buell Street. He applied for a building permit to construct a single-family dwelling on the property and other improvements such as driveways and walkways. He obtained the building permit, constructed the house, constructed the driveway. When he went to submit the as-built survey, and the house was constructed in accordance with the plans that were approved, the township ascertained that they erred in issuing him the permits because the zone requirements for coverage for the building is 15%, and the house was constructed as approved at 21.5%. He also received an approval for 32.09% of impervious coverage, where the ordinance only allowed 25% coverage. He also, as you may recall, added some additional walkways to get from the driveway to the house, which brought the impervious coverage up to 37.4%. At the original hearing, Mr. Singh testified to getting the permits for the house, and he built the house in accordance with the permits. Also, at the original hearing, there was a neighbor, Mr. Phillips, who had some concerns regarding the
Water, right?
The water. As a result of that, we adjourned the hearing. The township engineering department was out to the property on more than one occasion to determine how to address the water issue. And there were certain pipes that were in fact installed under the direction of the Township Engineering Department. I do have a report dated May 21st indicating that all of the requirements that were requested to be performed by the Engineering Department were in fact satisfied and performed. I'd like to mark that as I think we better do it as A1 with tonight's date.
A1 with tonight's date. I don't have the markings from the first hearing.
Yeah, and I don't remember what they were. I have some copies, so I'll pass this out. At the hearing in January of 2018, we concluded all of our testimony. Subsequent to that hearing, in addition to doing all of the work that was requested by the engineering department, which in fact resulted in us taking any of the water from our property and some of the water that may run from Mr. Phillips' property onto our property, taking it away from Mr. Phillips' property, it took it out to Buell Street where there's a catch basin. We had some meetings both at the site and also here in the municipal building with Mr. Phillips' attorney, Mr. Linus, Mr. Perez from Mr. Linus's office, and Mr. Phillips was at the meetings. And we also had an engineer that was hired by Mr. Phillips. At this juncture, we have, in our opinion, addressed everything that we were required to address by the township to deal with the water issue. We have presented in January all of the testimony that we intended to present, and I think at this point, Mr. Phillips probably wants to present testimony, which obviously he's entitled to, and I would then reserve the right to either recall Mr. Singh or cross-examine Mr. Phillips, or both. So that's what has happened in the last year. The other reason why it took so long to come back here is because we also, after we did the improvements to handle the drainage, we had to wait until we had some rainfall so that the improvements can be inspected to make sure that they were adequately addressing the issue of the drainage.
Okay. So basically, your presentation's completed.
Yeah, when we stopped the hearing in January of last year, yeah, we finished all of our testimony, and the board sort of said to us, because we had at that time a verbal report from the Township Engineering Department, that you were not happy with a verbal report, so have the Engineering Department issue a written report. They actually went out and re-inspected. They made us do a couple other things, but you now do have a report from the Engineering Department saying we have addressed all their concerns.
Okay, then with this engineering report, then I would say your part of it's completed.
That is our position.
Okay, then the next step in the hearing would be open to the public. Any comments on the presentation? He has all the concerns that were presented are considered closed and satisfied by the engineer. Every building permit, everything that was built according to the building permits that were issued. Okay, we're now open to the public.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
But use a mic.
Mr. Chairman, just a little clarification. They were, as far as impervious coverage, that they didn't build per the permits entirely. As indicated, and I think as Mr. Lanford indicated, it was approved for more impervious than was permitted. The approved plans that the building permit was 32.09 was approved, and what was constructed was 37.4. The driveway was a little bit wider than what was on the approved plans, and they added some sidewalks that weren't on the original plans. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record. There was a little bit more that the applicant did above and beyond what was on the approved plans.
Were there any modifications to reduce? I seem to recall that there were modifications to the impervious coverage.
No, the issue was, can we handle the drainage? There was never a request to reduce it, and if you recall, and I do have the photographs here that were presented. I only have one set, but I can pass them around. If the board recalls, the testimony was when the driveway was constructed, it was constructed at a certain width and then widened because there is no parking at all allowed on Buell Street. And so since he had his family residing there and had 4 cars, there was no place to park them. And the other thing that was an issue was we had driveways and we had a house, but we had no walkways that were approved to get from the driveways to the house. So I guess we can mark this as A2. These were copies of some of the exhibits, and some of them actually were updated since the last time we were here, but I only have one set. I'll pass it around. And it's a total... six photographs.
And you mark that as A2?
Yes.
So, Mark, I have a question. So the mitigation measures, were they designed for the full ask of impervious or just the original approval?
My understanding, it's that they're for the full 37%.
Okay.
To capture the water resulting from the impervious on Mr. Singh's property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then.
Sorry, I'd ask you to take a microphone in your left hand and raise your right hand. You swear that or affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Your name and address, please.
My name is Richard Phillips, residing at 23 Den Herder Drive, Somerset, New Jersey, Franklin Township.
Okay, before you get started, I see that you have some presentation electronically.
Yes.
Have you provided a copy of that to either the applicant or to the zoning board?
This is a kind of a subset summary of what I submitted to the board and the applicant in January 18th testimony. Everyone had a copy then. I only have 7 copies tonight. I moved to electronic copies so everyone could see that. If they want a handout of it, I can pass one out to the applicant so he has his own copy if he wants.
Do we know if the zoning board file has a copy of the documents?
Not this one. This one was current for tonight.
Okay, you're going to have to provide copies for the zoning board file.
Right, that's no problem. I have one I can give them tonight.
Okay, and if you haven't given it to the applicant yet, you should give it to the applicant as well.
I think I should take this opportunity to reiterate, when the board left at the conclusion of the last meeting, it was really 2 things the board wanted, and I did leave the room for a second, so I apologize if Mr. Lanford covered this. The one was you wanted the engineer to look at it, and then that resulted in this May memo. And then Mr. Lanford indicated that his client would consider reasonable, correct me if I'm not characterizing your what you told the board a year ago, you would consider reasonable accommodations for Mr. Phillips to address his drainage issues. And most of the conversations over the last year have been to consider that issue. So I just wanted to make it clear that there really was 2 things. Mr. Singh handling his issue, and that's mostly what, handling his drainage requirements, and that's Scott Thomas's memo. And then the desire by Mr. Phillips and your client's indication that he would consider reasonable accommodations.
That is accurate, and that was communicated both to the township. We had a meeting here that was attended by you, Mr. Dominack, and Mr. Linus, at which time I said to them if they had some suggestions that if there's a way that we can assist reasonably to solve a drainage problem on Mr. Phillips's property, we would be willing to discuss that. We had a similar discussion earlier this year. No, actually, it was December of last year. It was December.
Cold.
Yeah, it was cold. We met at the site with Mr. Phillips, the applicant, Mr. Dominic, Mr. Healy, and actually Mr. Phillips did bring an engineer, Mr. Duran at that time, and that was the last communication we had from them, was the meeting at that site.
Go ahead, Mr. Phillips.
Okay. I have a subset of some of the slides I presented. Some of this has been remedied or mitigated, but I just want to refresh the board's memory, so I just cycle through these kind of real fast. If there's any questions, I answer them, and Mr. Lanford can also ask questions about it. This started with a letter to Julio Vega in November of 2016 because I had flooding in early 2016. So this has been going on a while, trying to get these issues addressed. The area in question is my property with the big 83 on it. This is prior to the subdivision, a lot 1.02 to the left of the screen there is the subdivision, which is part of Mr. Singh's property now. And the arrow shows the natural grade from lot number 3 on the right, lot number 2 mine, And that 66-foot right-of-way is now part of Lot 2 and Lot 3. There was a lot line adjustment, so that whole area is owned by myself and my neighbor. And to the right of that, that open space is township property. That part of it grades into a swale over there, part of it drains left towards my property. That was the first initial view of what had happened while the houses were under construction in 2016. It's another shot of that. The flooding between my property and 21 Den Herder, which is next to Mr. Singh's property. That was the initial swale that he had put in with. He put in one pipe and then he addressed a second pipe and worked on it some more. So it looked better. Moving forward, he had some trees in the back, which looked pretty good. The swale was wide open. I suggested that get regraded to address the standing water in the front. That pin on the left side here, right in the center, is the corner marker of the property between 21 Den Herder over here, 3 Buell Street over here, and my property over here. I own the full length back through the railroad right-of-way now. I suggested maybe I'd put in a PVC pipe or something underground and regrade it for him to put hide that, to access his drainage area that he put in those pipes. A solution that was talked about with the engineers and Julio Vega was maybe put in a drain, possibly right there. Going back to this slide, there was discussions about getting an easement myself with 21 Den Herder Drive and running a pipe across the whole yard, which I provided a quote for. It was the initial quote. I figured we'd start to discuss that. I never got a reply back. It basically was possibly too expensive. And then we met with everyone, including my attorney and my engineer. Mr. Lanford suggested I'm welcome to bring an attorney and an engineer back for the next meeting. I did that. My attorney left Franklin's firm in December 31st, and to engage another attorney just didn't make sense to bring him up to speed. With what's gone on with paying attorneys and engineers, Mr. Singh and I could have probably just funded it ourselves and fixed the problem. But that's kind of what's going on and what started this whole thing. The other thing was, here's a shot in June of 2016. It's Lake Phillips back there. This is prior to the drainage that he put in. So he's mitigated that. This is prior to his trees. So he's done a nice job of addressing part of the problem. But then he went in and he put up this fence. And he was told by the township zoning folks that the fence had to be 3 inches above grade. He put it flush with the grade. Again, this now acts like a dam, keeping the water on my property. The other second thing is, based on the location of the fence is on my property. He did not ask for permission. According to the ordinance, it can't be on my property. So I have a supportive letter from my engineer, which I'll address later, stating that it's on my property and that the fence impedes any drainage into the swale, which Mr. Lanford in testimony said that the swale that Mr. Singh put in even helps drainage on my property. With the fence that he put in,
Mr. Phillips, let me stop you for a minute. Is the fence part of this application before the zoning board?
It's part of this overall issue. So just let Mr. Phillips finish his, and I'm sure Mr. Lanford has questions for him. I would recommend we let these two gentlemen, present their sides and let the whole thing be aired, and okay. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions.
So that's what I have in photos at this time. So, Mr. Singh, where am I? Let me start out here. I'm here today to oppose the applicant's effort to sidestep the law by applying for a hardship variance. The applicants Surrender and Reno Singh have not been good neighbors to me. They have not addressed the flooding on my property due to their failure to comply with existing construction codes and ordinances and submitted drawings. Plan called for 2 dry wells in front. There's supposed to be 2 manholes in there. I've never seen anything like that, nor do I have certification from engineering that they're there. And I've did OPA requests on drawings. All I have photos of.
I'm sorry.
The plan that was originally submitted calls for 2 dry wells in front of the property. What was put in was a large pit with stone as a drainage, and if that's adequate, fine, but it's different from the plan. It was never addressed based on what I tried to find. Now that the non-conforming house and impervious surfaces have already been built, they are claiming a hardship. I'm outraged by this because of their own actions have brought up about the hardship for me. Let me restate that. Now that the non-conforming house and impervious surfaces have already been built, they are claiming a hardship. This is outrageous to me because their own actions have brought about the hardship. It has been explained to me that a variance for hardship is the law, is not about personal or financial hardship. Instead, the hardship variance can be granted when there's a particular physical or topographical feature of the property that prevents adherence to the law. If anyone has a claim for personal financial hardship, it should be me. I'm the person who has used time, energy, and money to get the applicants to do what's right. No more, no less. I have lived in my house since 1987, grew up on the street prior to that. I've also given 40 years of service to the fire service in the township and currently chief engineer. I know the town. I know the areas that flood during heavy storms. I've shown the board in the township photos of the flooding. They have been out to the site numerous times. I never had water on my property until my neighbors deviated from Franklin Township standards. His Ameritech engineering report dated 10/12/16 does not take into account the water runoff from far back of my property. And I have an exhibit handout here that shows the page that was referenced that takes into the calculations for the drainage that would go into the swale. And this is out of his engineering report.
You know, I've seen pictures now from 2016, but I haven't seen any pictures from 2018. Do you have any pictures from what's going on now?
Well, it really hasn't rained that hard that we've had floods like we've had before. I've had some pooling between the two.
But no, you didn't answer my. Do you have any pictures?
Not with me right now. I do have some pictures showing the flooding on 2018. It's basically between the 2 properties and the drainage in the swale. But the fence has exacerbated the problem. Okay, so if you look at that, part of the township open space property, runoff from number 25, number 23, and the end of Den Herder Drive. When the road was never milled prior to paving, some water from the Den Herder Drive road, along with the front of my property and the front of 25 Den Herder, drain into the low spot between 21 and 23, my property, and then goes back towards Mr. Singh's property. Since number 3 and 5 Buell Street were built, no natural drainage towards the South Millbush Roads exists anymore. So at the end of Buell Street, there's a big inlet that takes the water away from the area. And I have no access to that because my water doesn't naturally drain across the property. I also have an exhibit from the county engineering office showing that it's high on the right, on the 25 side of Den Herder Drive and low on the Buell Street side of Den Herder Drive. So that natural drainage is now blocked with the construction of these 2 houses. Suggestions were given to the town and Mr. Singh install a large pipe on the property with an inlet by the storm drain. That was done by, made by Julio Vega. or I suggested, and my engineer suggested, that we put a storm drain at the corner of 23, 21, and 3. That's where that fence was. And we'd fund the installation with a pipe, with an easement or something that we could have installed. I asked the township to install a storm drain at the street, the corner of 21 and 23. My engineer met with the township on his own. My attorney met with the township on his own. And then there was discussions about piping the existing storm drain when we all met, located between 18 and 20 Dan Herter Drive. That storm drain's on private property, but yet is maintained by the township. The township said they will not put property, would not put or install a storm drain on private property. I'm asking for a drain to be installed at the corner of the street and connected to the existing storm drains. My attorney has met with the township. I've covered that. The township says they're not responsible, yet recently, I think 2 years ago, they installed a storm drain on Den Herter at the road between houses number 5 and number 7 to mitigate flooding of number 5 Den Herter, and they connected it across the street. The township put all that in. I'm asking for the same thing down my end to abate the flooding. Furthermore, Mr. Singh says he's not responsible. The township says they're not responsible. They both created the problem. Who's responsible? Mr. Singh initially submitted plans that were non-conforming to the township ordinances before construction started. The township approved, admittedly in error, a larger house than the zoning permitted. Mr. Lanford testified to that effect. Mr. Singh was a licensed builder, as stated in testimony, he wanted a nicer, larger sidewalk to accommodate his large house and wanted a larger driveway to accommodate multiple vehicles. Why was this not thought out prior to the plan submission? At the zoning board, you have the authority to make things right and deny them a variance or correct the problems. The applicant's variance cannot be granted without causing substantial harm or negative impact to my property. The applicants constructed their home despite the building coverage and impervious coverage being over the zoning limits. Mr. Singh has been involved in construction as a builder contractor and should know better than to deviate from approved land. Per my conversation with the state in 2017, Mr. Singh and GSM LLC, GSM Global, was a registered builder up until 2014. He built number 3 Buell Street in 2015 and 16, had it up for sale prior to completion. I believe additionally he continues in construction as a lien was placed against him as GSM Global at 3 Buell Street. And I have
object to
and I have a clerk.
That has no relevancy to the issue that is before the board this evening. The issue before the board this evening deals with drainage and alleged impacts on his property, and whether Mr. Singh was or was not a builder is totally irrelevant. So I would object to any additional testimony along those lines.
Can I clarify something from testimony on 2018?
I would think that the fact that he's a builder is relevant, but I think that his financial situation or anything else that relates to what goes on in his business is irrelevant. And if you're going to go into that, you're basically wasting your time.
Now, I just stated for the fact, just to
juice it up. I know what you're doing.
No, I did that because I looked it up, and he claimed in his testimony on January 18th in front of everybody that he was not a builder and he did not know what impervious coverage was. And Mr. Lanford asked him that question. So I'm just saying that was not the case if he was a registered builder. That's all. End of discussion. And if he questioned that, I brought that as a supporting document. I could care less what his financial position is. Despite attempts to reach an agreement and mitigate the drainage issues caused by the applicants, they have rejected a proposal that would have addressed the drainage issues on 23 Den Herter Drive. In fact, per my attorney, the applicant rejected the proposal mitigation plan without any comment. My attorney's comment to me is they just don't care. They do not want to pay for any part of correcting runoff water from flooding my property. That was stated verbally when my engineer, my attorney, Mr. Lanford, Mr. Dominic and Mr. Healy were in front of them. They said they will not compensate anything. If I wanted an easement, I could ask for an easement on their property, but it would be at my cost. I can get an easement from my neighbor's property. They said there's no problem doing that. But why am I the one to solve this problem when the township and Mr. Singh caused it? The applicant also continues to create issues that would exacerbate the drainage caused by his failure to follow the land use rules. For example, the applicant installed a fence on the backyard restricting drainage to the swell between his property, 23 Den Herder Drive. This swell, which was placed in the area in an attempt to mitigate the drainage caused by his large house, raised grades. He has more impervious coverage. The fence is now negatively impacting my property further since its installation. There are two issues with the fence per my conversations with township officials. First, he is specifically instructed to install the fence at 3 inches above grade, which he did not do. This was not done. Second, the fence intrudes on my property and was placed on my property without consent. This was observed by the township officials while on site. I have a note from my engineering survey firm confirming that.
I'm going to object as this being hearsay. If he wanted to bring in testimony that the fence, first of all, I think whether the fence encroaches or doesn't encroach is not a board issue. That's an issue between Mr. Singh and Mr. Phillips, and if Mr. Phillips thinks there's an encroachment, there are legal remedies that he has available to him to move the fence. It's our position that the fence is where it should be. We got a permit to put it there. But again, the location of the fence should not be an issue that is before this board.
What is at issue is whether or not it was.
Let me explain that. And this is a matter of terminology, but the terminology is important. Mr. Singh was not instructed to put the fence 3 inches above grade. It was suggested that he do that so that the drainage could continue to go under the property, to go under the fence to the swale. It was suggested that he do that, and it was told to him that in all likelihood, once this comes back before the board, staff, and I'm doing so now, that if the board is inclined to approve anything, that be a condition of the approval. But there's no zoning requirement that says the fence has to be off the grade. So he wasn't, I'm just saying, Mr. Singh did not go against an instruction of township staff. He has not yet carried out a suggestion of township staff.
And when we met at the site in December, we indicated that we would in fact raise the fence. Obviously, it's the winter time. We weren't going to go out there and have somebody do all of that work during the winter. So when the weather got nicer, we were going to do that. We indicated that to Mr. Phillips, Mr. Perez, who was his attorney at the time, and Mr. Duran, in the presence of Mr. Healy and Mr. Dominic, that the fence was going to be raised. We were going to do it. Although we were not legally required to do it, we were going to do it.
Well, I would like to see that done prior to anything being approved. I just want to wrap up right now. Although I'm not an attorney, I assert that the applicants have not proven their case and should not receive a hardship variance. Their lot does not have exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of specific piece of property, or exceptional topographic conditions or physical features uniquely affecting that specific piece of property, or any extraordinary and exceptional situation uniquely affecting their property or structure, lawfully existing. The key is lawfully existing. The applicants have not followed the law. All I'm asking is for them to work with me to correct the drainage problems. I appeal to you as fellow homeowners in Franklin Township. How would you feel if these applicants were your neighbors? What would you do? And if approved, what recourse do I have after a heavy rain or melting snow runoff causes further damage to my property? Luckily, we have not encountered this situation over the past year. I hope you guys do the right thing, and all I ask in fairness is that you deny the applicants variance relief they have requested at this time.
Okay, I'd like to go back for 1 second to what Mr. Shepherd asked. What's the situation now, today?
The water Really, it hasn't really flooded. We haven't had the substantial rains. I still have.
I'm gonna take a formal, I want to formally, I don't know what you consider a substantial amount of rain, but from my point of view, it seems like that's about all it's been doing for quite a while, off and on, all right? Is there anything in your, what's out there now? And if the fence is raised 3 inches and the water can flow freely, what is the problem? Show us what the problem is on your property. Because we have an engineering report that says he's met all the conditions that he has to meet in terms of the runoff created by the 1,000 square foot impervious coverage. Let's cut out all the hype and get down to what's important and what's not. What's out there now, today?
This is what's out there today. Come back. You have 3/4 of a drain that's on the heaviest rain that I've seen. That was last year. It hasn't been this year. It hasn't snowed. We have no snow melt this year to cause any problems to say that the fences, look at the flood before the fence. What recourse do I have if he doesn't address this?
That water condition, though, does not exist today, right? That's a picture of something.
That's what today, well,
When I, okay, not
No,
today,
but
but
it-
within
the
the
snow
last,
melted.
it was in the last modification to his drainage.
When was this picture taken?
That was taken in June of August of last year. Around, yeah, but nothing. He's not changed his drainage since then. And all he's done is put up a fence. So now, that's got according to engineering, he has met his obligation based on his water runoff from his house and his leaders and his gutters. He has not addressed any runoff by me. The township approved his house and a neighbor's house. Inadequate drainage was put in place, and that frustrates me. And
just out of curiosity, was the fence up at the time?
no,
Were all the pipes up at that
yes,
time?
there's 2 pipes there. And Julio Vega stated that 2 pipes weren't enough, but he's gone, so I can't rely on him. The township recommended we mitigate and work together to try to solve this problem, but it comes down to who's paying. The township approved the house too large. What else do I do? What recourse do I have? I come to you guys, in all honesty, to what I observe. It happens again, I'll take some more photos, but this is a problem because it hasn't been addressed properly. I have standing water and flood waters, and my sump pump is constantly running. I know that from history. Do I time my sump pump, how many times it runs? I could. I just know from being there since 1987 what the water looks like. And I've had neighbors testify last time also, what they observed. All I'm asking for is mitigate it, address it. He could have as big a house as he wants. But, you know, he's got to do it legally. And I think by approving a variance, because he just decided he wanted a nice sidewalk and a larger driveway, which he testified to on January 18th last year, is not right.
Is this a picture of one of the pipe inverts that
This is in the corner.
had to be cleaned? So what I'm reading here is that they've been cleaned and they're functioning.
Mr. Chairman, Vince Dominack, I'm the Economic Development Director for the township. When this first started, I was the senior zoning officer, and as most of you know, when we have issues such as this that involve neighbors, Bob Bornlocker, the manager, has me involved in this. From the beginning, when this first happened, Mr. Singh was told that he needed a variance. He was also told that before he comes to this board, he should address the drainage issue for the entire amount of impervious that he had put in. As you can see from the report in front of you, from the township's perspective, he has addressed all the drainage issues for his property. In addition, it is the township's position that part of the drainage issue that Mr. Phillips has talked about is being addressed and will be further addressed when he moves fence. It is also the township's position that the drainage issue that is occurring at Mr. Phillips' property is due to the drainage on his property and not the adjacent property. The applicant has addressed everything that the town has asked them to do. We were in all the meetings to try to get the parties together. Unfortunately, the applicant indicated that he would allow additional water to go through his property through an easement. Mr. Phillips was unable to come up with a solution that was anywhere near financially feasible for the applicant. The applicant was more than willing to, and the township was willing to assist them in various options. The bottom line is that, and I'm not talking about the variance, that's a total separate issue. I'm talking about is the township's position that the applicant has taken every step needed to address every drainage issue on that property. It is also the township's position that the fence, even though it's not an issue, is on the applicants, and we have been provided no information whatsoever, no survey or anything else that shows anything. In fact, the survey that we have, that we've seen, shows the fence on that property.
I was asked by zoning that if a layman could see the fence on my property, that's all they had. They did not have an engineer capable of deciding that. If the pin is right there, and Mr. Sink's property is in the upper right of that picture, 21 Den Herder to the left of the picture, and my property to 21 Den Herder to the lower right.
Doesn't matter.
The township does not get involved, nor does this board
It's a
get
zoning
involved.
violation.
It is not a zoning
It's
violation.
an ordinance violation then.
It is not, unless you give us some proof via survey, and if you give us that, we will issue a zoning violation to the applicant. You have given us nothing.
I sent a letter
besides-
to the effect that both of you guys were out there.
Once again, you need to give us proof via survey, which you have failed to do. We've asked you numerous times to do that. We can't go by when two property owners are in dispute. That's a dispute between the property owners. Unless one of the property owners gives us proof via survey, then we will take the appropriate action. That's
So a letter
township's
from an
policy.
engineering firm is inadequate.
Well, first of all,
It is not
we don't.
adequate. We would
yeah.
need the township would need a survey, and the zoning board wouldn't even get involved in an issue like that.
Yeah.
That's the township.
Right now, all I see, maybe it's only me, we have, based on the testimony, if you want to call it that, of Mr. Dominic and the letter from the engineer, I don't see a reason not to grant the variance. The rest of the issues are between you and your neighbor. I don't know why we're sitting here being subjected to this at this point. The engineer says all the runoff from the impervious coverage is taken care of. Mr. Dominic has mentioned that the runoff they've determined is coming from you now. If the fence is, if his fence is acting as a dam and the water can't go on his property, then the water must be coming from somewhere else.
It's coming from the two properties in the township property next to me. There's no natural drainage anymore.
My only suggestion there then is
Too bad?
go to somewhere else within the township structure. Our issue here as the zoning board is to decide whether there's enough evidence to grant 1,000 square foot impervious coverage variance. And my opinion is that right now, there is enough evidence because it's on paper, it's sworn testimony from another witness. I don't have anything from you.
I have, you're saying the letter's inadequate. The meetings we've had with the engineering and the attorney are inadequate, and you're just going to go by what the township is saying, and the
I have a certified engineer saying, it's not just that the township is saying it, it's someone that's employed, certified and educated, made
then
this determination.
why was it approved larger than allowed by ordinance?
I can't tell you why, but that's not the issue that we're talking about right now. We're looking at impervious coverage and whether it's been dealt with and whether that runoff from that impervious coverage is affecting you. And right now, as far as I'm concerned,
What
all
about,
the evidence says it's not.
well, look at the pictures. The pictures show that
Haven't shown me any
his yard is higher than my yard. So where's the water go from my yard?
No recent pictures, and then you're telling me that there's been
Well,
no rain.
his property hasn't changed. Well,
where's it not raining in Den Herder?
We've missed a lot of the rain, and that's obvious. You want me to do I have to get rainfall charts and compare them with prior years to justify the
How about
photos?
yesterday, with all the snow and ice and the melting in the 60 degrees today? There's nothing out there in your yard that you can take a picture of and show us?
That's,
You can't just come in here and say, this exists, this exists,
okay.
this exists.
What happens when it does happen, and I come in here and said, I told you so?
Did you
What
take a
recourse do I
picture?
have? If in the future something floods and you allow this to go through, you're allowing this to go through based on, well, we wanted a bigger driveway. We wanted a nicer sidewalk, which we forgot. That's unacceptable in terms of the variance
According
definition.
to the township's certified engineer, those issues have been resolved. You're not showing us that they haven't been. It rains, it snows, it melts, there's mud, there's water, every place. Doesn't mean it's coming from here. You haven't shown that.
So,
Raise the fence? Yeah, we'll make him raise the fence.
well, then delay this until the fence is raised then. That's all I'm asking.
What we would.
Now, we'll make it a condition.
We would
Right.
condition the approval.
And frankly, I think that both sides in this have not acted in the best way at all. You and Mr. Singh are both acting very, very unpleasant as the finest way to.
I
Now,
agree.
I'm telling you that I'm not pleased with your behavior, how you've acted. I think Mr. Singh, by installing that fence at ground level, that's a nasty thing to do. So I just can't understand why you people have to behave like this and visit this nonsense upon us. I think we've heard enough from you. I think we've heard enough from everybody. Unless there's somebody else. Do you want to do something at this point?
I just two things, because one is he made an assertion that the dry wells that were required as part of the original approval and building permit were not installed. I'm going to put into evidence as a
I
three,
think it's A3.
the as-built survey, which shows the dry wells that were installed by Mr. Singh at the front of the property. So they are there, and they were inspected by the township. So
Did you mark that, or you want me to mark it?
I
For
can-
the, for the record, is that, you're referring to the manholes that are shown on the as-built?
They're labeled as manholes, but those are the dry wells.
Okay, that's going to be A3, and Mr. Phillips, I've marked your two documents as A1 or O1 and O2.
And then before we consider any formal action, we have more to do?
Yeah, just for, again, just to make it clear, in June of this year, we had a meeting here in the municipal building with Mr. Linus and Mr. Healy and Mr. Dominic. And I said to Mr. Linus that, if your client has a problem, we would be willing to work with him and to assist him in trying to remedy that problem, come up with a solution, and we could see if we can resolve it. That was in June. At the end of September, I got a letter from Mr. Linus, actually from Mr. Perez from Mr. Linus's office, which I will want to mark as A4, basically saying that they were going to bypass my client's property and do something on somebody else's property, provided we compensate them $50,000. And if we agree to give them the $50,000, they would drop their objection to this application. So I want to mark that letter in evidence as A4.
I was advised by my attorney to get a quote. I did a quote, and then figured we'd start there and negotiate something. But rather than put it on Mr. Singh's property, I offered an alternative.
Can I didn't interrupt you.
At the risk of trying to keep us from being here.
Yeah, and just one last point. We, in December, as indicated, met at the site with Mr. Phillips, Mr. Duran, Mr. Healy, and Mr. Dominic. And at that time, we said to Mr. Duran, if there is a way to solve the problem by us granting you an easement through our property so that there can be a pipe running from Mr. Phillips' property out to Buell Street to the inlet, we would be willing to grant you an easement. We're not going to put the pipe in for you, but we'd give you an easement so you could put the pipe in if that's your proposed solution and if it works. We never received a response to that. So we have made efforts to try to be neighborly and try to resolve this. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to. The issue of and it's clear, the house was built as per the approved plans that were approved by the township. The township made a mistake. I don't think it's reasonable or rational for this board to say you got to tear the house down. The impervious coverage, again, 32% of it was approved. We went over an additional 5%. We gave you the reasons why. I think they are compelling reasons, and I think what we've done to mitigate, we've done. Despite what the board's going to do this evening, my client's still willing to discuss with Mr. Phillips if he wants an easement and comes up with a plan. We'd be willing to have that conversation going forward if it helps mitigate his problem. But I think it's his problem and not something caused by us. We've done everything that we've been required to do, and we've agreed to raise the fence. So I just want to make sure all of that is on the record.
All right. We're not going to be here all night for this. Do you have anything new?
Just to wrap up.
You can add to what your presentation.
Let me just ask a question about I see the manholes on this.
Yeah, those are the dry wells.
Dry wells. And are they functioning?
Yeah, they were inspected by the township and they were approved.
And is the water in them now? I mean, today? And
Well, the fact that they exist, there's also, in the November 22nd, 2017, one of the outstanding items at that time was that Mr. Singh needed to schedule inspection of the west dry well. So you have to assume that there's an east, and the as-built shows that there's two. And then as of the May 21st, 2018, the scheduling inspection of west dry well was satisfied, meaning staff had gone out and...
full of water, or is it, I mean, was it a wet day?
I didn't do the inspection, but between November 2017 and May 2018, access was provided for township staff to review that dry well.
And he put them in, right?
Okay.
Did they function?
Do you have anything new that you can add that might shed some light on helping us make it?
I was advised by my attorney and the engineer that I stay off of his property. I'm willing to meet with him, sit down with Mr. Lanford, the three of us, and, finance part of that corner to put in. I'll put in my own storm drain if I can connect it to here, and he could put something in writing that I have access to that. When he put up the fence, I no longer have easy access to mitigate the issue with him. If he wants to remove the fence completely, then I'll go and my cost connect to his swell if he allows it in writing. And I'll put in the proper piping and the proper drainage, storm drain type unit right at that corner and allow that to happen with the approval of the township.
Well, that's something it seems you guys have got to work out among yourselves that has nothing to do with us tonight.
Right,
And
just
Mr.
if
Langford
the
said-
board decides to make that a condition, that they take another look at that, just make sure that whatever they're doing needs to get an approval from the township, because that dry well and those pipes have a certain capacity, so we would need to make sure that those dry wells and the pipes don't go over the capacity.
Ms. Grumman, I just want to make it clear. We're willing to work with them. I don't think that should be a condition of approval. I think the application should stand on the merits and on the work that we did. And we will be happy, as we have always been, to sit down and talk about granting him an easement if he has a plan to get through our property out to Buell Street. We're not going to design it for him, we're not going to engineer it for him, but we would be happy to help accommodate it.
The problem with making it a condition of the approval is how does township staff enforce it? I mean, I think, Dave said that, how do we determine whether they've made a reasonable accommodation or
I don't
so
see,
it's.
I don't see that I would make it a condition. I'm just saying that quite apart from what we're doing tonight, if the two property owners want to continue to work it out, that's something that's separate and apart from what we're doing. If in the course of working it out, they do something that requires approvals, so be it. Again, it has nothing to do with this application or what we're doing.
And township staff will be happy to, if we can, be involved and help reach a compromise and reach a solution, we'll be happy to be involved.
Right,
But-
we'll take the next step right now.
Can I just say one last thing?
Last thing.
If the township allowed the construction of the houses, and it affected the drainage on the street because there are no storm drains past Buell Street on Den Herder Drive, there's a storm drain across the street from me that the township manages, and the township put in storm drains based on complaints from other neighbors on the street of flooding. Why isn't it up to, or the responsibility of the township to address flooding on my area, on Den Herder?
This is the zoning board. This is not the township.
That's something you have to take up with the township, that we have no jurisdiction over. The only thing we have to consider, the variance can be granted.
Well, according to my attorney, he doesn't meet the standard variance requirements, but that's hearsay again because he's not here. So I've done the best I could to be honest and straightforward with everybody. If you delay it, I'm willing to sit down with Mr. Singh and work out a solution and get the approval from the township to do so.
Sounds like all this should have been done before tonight.
Well,
I mean, now we're here and everybody's got their back up against the wall. We're all willing to sit down and talk.
Well, the letters and the meetings I have haven't gone anywhere.
All right, right now, we're going to open to the public to follow the procedure.
Thank you.
If there's anyone who would like to say something concerning this application, come forward. We'll be swearing you in.
Good evening.
Good
I'm
evening.
Judith DeFrancesco.
Could you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Your name and address again, please?
I'm Judith DeFrancesco, 25 Den Herder Drive, Somerset, New Jersey. I've lived in that house for 48 years. And Richie moved in later. And there has never been flooding like there has been since the Singh's house was built. And it's like you don't have to ask permission. You have to ask forgiveness for this issue. And I feel it's a hardship on Richie, Mr. Phillips, that this whole thing has gone on so long. And I think it's shameful. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Closed to the public.
And Mr. Linus, you handed me two documents. One was the letter.
Not Mr. Linus.
I'm looking at Mr. Linus's letter, which I did mark as A4. It references the quote, which was brought up by Mr. Phillips. You also handed me that, so I'm going to mark that as A5.
That was part of the letter.
Well, they're not attached. They're separate documents, so I marked them different.
You want to sum up?
I think I already did. I don't want to belabor the issue. I think we've provided the adequate proofs for the variance. As far as the other issues, again, we'd be willing to continue these discussions.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, go to it. What do you want to do here?
I just somehow it doesn't seem complete, or it may be ended for tonight, but completed. It'd have to be some kind of a resolution with the drainage working, and
I see.
we don't have anything to say about that.
Well, the difficulty, I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
Our engineer has said drainage problem, at least insofar as the things been addressed. And we haven't got engineering testimony contrary. So we're kind of stuck at this point. The proofs before, it seems to me, support the variance, even though there's something about it that feels uncomfortable. And I guess the only thing we can do at this point is application before us and hope that the parties will, after the fact, unrelated to this application, try and continue to talk. And if, for example, the township has an obligation or should be addressing the drainage problem in a way that was addressed across the street from you, that's something, again, have to take up with the township. It's not our jurisdiction. We can't instruct them. We can't advise them. It has nothing to do with us. Our only consideration tonight is application.
I just wanted to say, there was a suggestion that the capacity of the two dry wells is unknown.
There's no, as far as I know, there's no issue with handling the water that's generated from Mr. Singh's property. That's been covered by the May 2018 letter from our engineering department. So Mr. Singh is handling the water and the impervious that's generated and running off of his property. The concern is Mr. Phillips' property and whether, what Mr. Singh has done is affecting his drainage.
And the capacity of the dry wells.
All I was saying before was that if they reach an agreement that they should come to the township and make sure that agreement doesn't have an adverse effect on what has been installed that is in conformance with our engineer. Because, for instance, if they reach an agreement that I'm making a ridiculous statement, that all the drainage on Mr. Phillips' property is going to come into that pipe and that dry well will be overburdened. We just need to review it, that's all. It is sufficiently serving, and it's actually oversized. There's more capacity in that pipe and the dry well than is needed for the occurrence on that property. We want to make sure if they reach an agreement that we don't create another problem, that's all.
All right.
I'd just like to say one thing. Isn't it?
No, it's out of order at this point.
Yeah,
So if the township approved something that was incorrect.
Any other thoughts?
well, I think that if that could get complete, and then if there were capacity and he wanted to build across to it.
Are we talking about the dry wells again?
Yeah.
There's no issue, there's nothing in here that says there's any problem with the dry wells. The dry wells were installed, they've been inspected.
Yeah.
There's no problem with
But wasn't
Mr.
there a
Singh's dry well.
suggestion that he build a pipe to
He wants-
someplace?
It has nothing to do with it.
There's nothing to do with it. Okay.
Mr. Phillips would, in some way, he mentioned having a pipe connection into Mr. Singh's swale and pipes. But that's to drain water coming from Mr. Phillips' property. The water that's generated from Mr. Singh is capturing the water running off of his property, though.
Okay, I got it. Wait a minute, I got that answer.
Okay, we do need a motion because we have a deadline to act.
I move that the condition to. Oh, okay. I move that the application be approved conditioned upon the fence being raised 3 inches in accordance with the recommendations of staff.
Anyone want to add anything or second it?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hold the board.
Anthony Caldwell,
Yes.
Laura Grauman,
Yes.
Donald Johnson,
When is this fence going to be raised?
No.
no.
We will raise it in the spring. If you want to put a deadline, you can indicate by the end of April.
90 days?
90 days is fine.
Good catch, Don.
Bruce McCracken,
Yes.
Alan Rich,
Yes.
Robert Shepherd,
I don't like this. I think that Mr. Singh was a builder who knew what he was doing, and he's just come in here to ask forgiveness, figuring that it would be an easy slide. I'm very concerned by his behavior, but I'm going to vote yes. But I'm just not happy with the way he went about things.
Mr. Chairman Thomas.
Sometimes I feel like I've just been exposed to another middle school experience with the way this has been playing out. I vote yes, but not happily. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Motion carried. Meeting adjourned.